Welcome to SportsLit. I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nate Sager. We were not on The Office together, but we are best friends.
Rick Vaive occupies an interesting space in Toronto Maple Leafs history. A star, a captain, when the threads that made the team glorious and tied together its rich history had completely come undone. Vaive came to the Maple Leafs in a trade with the Vancouver Canucks on February 18, 1980, right after the last links to their Stanley Cup teams of the 60s were symbolically severed. He would debut at the start of a new decade, similar to the star of the team at the time, Darryl Sittler, whose rookie season was in 1970-1971. Sittler took the captaincy from Dave Keon, who left on bad terms with owner Harold Ballard over contractual issues in 1975. And by the end of the decade, the bad blood boiled over, because now Sittler was being run out of town because of his rising influence with the NHLPA. Sittler skated out for the last Maple Leafs game of the 70s after using a scalpel to take the C off his jersey prior to a Saturday night game against the Winnipeg Jets on December 29, 1979. He had done that out of protest when the Leafs traded his best buddy, Lanny McDonald, basically because of his closeness to Sittler and the fact that Sittler had a no-trade clause and couldn't be moved himself. In November of 1980, the founder of the team, Conn Smythe, died as well. So back to Vaive. There's a saying that Smythe had: defeat did not rest lightly on their shoulders, and another that the Canadians still have on their dressing room wall. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. Using the latter, Vaive just happens to arrive at the point where the fracture became the great divide in the separate history of the forever rivals. The 80s were not kind to the Maple Leafs, but in that time Vaive excelled. Vaive was a pure goal scorer. He was the first Maple Leaf to net 50 in a season, and he did it 3 times in a row, from 81-82 to 83-84. And he would be named captain at the age of 22 until he was stripped of it in 1986. And as he writes in his new book, Catch-22, a play on the number he wore, the C had become a scarlet letter. There was no clean passing of the torch, and the Maple Leafs didn't have a captain until Rob Ramage was given the C in 1989, and no real success until 1992-93. Allow for one more bit of symbolism before we converse with Rick, and actually before I hand it over to Nate, about this new book that was completed with journalist Scott Morrison and released 1 week ago on November 17th under the Penguin Random House banner. Vaive ended up with 299 goals with the Maple Leafs, and seeing his connection with the club, which is outlined in the book, I think 300 would have meant something to him. Sittler ended up with 484 career goals, 16 away from 500. If there had been more stability during those years that they played in Toronto, both of those players, if those milestones could have been achieved, that's something you wonder about. Vaive played in the NHL from 1979 to 1992 for the Canucks, Leafs, and Buffalo Sabres, and he's still the current franchise leader with 54 goals scored in a single season. As Scott Morrison writes in the acknowledgments, and I'll take the last line of the quote he uses from poet and novelist Ben Okri, "Where there is perfection, there is no story to tell." And he follows, "Rick was a great hockey player who could have been greater, if only." I'll stop at hockey, but there's much more to this book, as you may have read about, and as you will find out in our questions with Mr. Vaive. But before we speak to Rick, here's Nate.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Rick Vaive's stock and trade, of course, was that heavy shot. And, Catch-22 gets into, heavy subject matter, the struggle of playing a pro sport when you have, as Rick reveals, an anxiety disorder. But I found this book was really done in an accessible way that didn't fixate on the negatives. Now, 2 good books by famous sports people who have anxiety and mood disorders are, of course, tennis great Andre Agassi's Open and football greats Steve Young's QB, My Life Behind the Spiral. It is refreshing to see another notable National Hockey League star making a contribution in this regard, because for a long time, hockey, even relative to the other elite sports, hewed to the stiff upper lip approach. Vaive and Scott Morrison, they have a narrative that I think reflects a truth that every day a hockey player in the NHL is a dream. But it certainly didn't help anyone to be in the circus atmosphere of Maple Leaf Gardens in the 1980s under proprietor Harold Ballard. Fans of all ages should read this to learn about the working conditions for NHL players of Vaive's vintage, especially the Ballard Leafs.
Your pal Hal.
Yeah, where to start? He ran an unsuccessful pro hockey team.
Well, he did run it, right?
Oh, yeah. In hindsight, Ballard was probably a narcissist and gave the media sort of this outrageous soundbite ownership it craved. He was even described as a manipulator of the media in the Leafs media guide. But he really seemed ill-equipped to handle the governance side. And in the process, he just, as you teed up, Neil, he tore a cultural and a sports institution in Canada asunder. It was all cute for a while, and it made for good headlines. But as chess master Gary Kasparov recently tweeted, "Clowns with power are not funny at all." That was clear in real time, and it was well documented toward the end of the Ballard era, particularly by the Globe and Mail's William Houston in 2 books that I read as a tween in the late 80s as a Leaf fan. I think my parents must have wanted me to cheer for the Leafs so I'd understand what the Great Depression was like or something. Now, I have first-hand concept of what the popular understanding in those days was about the lasting effects of negative work environments. But, it was definitely negative for the players, and nothing could really be done about Ballard until the damage was done, which sounds a little familiar. There are parallels to 2020, when Vaive writes, you could argue Harold didn't take running the business as seriously as he took saving money. My mind kind of pivots to some of the leadership we've had in Ontario lately, where they won't spend to protect us from the pandemic because maybe they want to spend in an election year, and the guy in charge is basically Kearney in The Simpsons standing on the dock saying it ain't getting any safer, as he just makes up a pandemic strategy on the fly. Now, I only reference that as an example of how certain people can gain the access to the levers of power and then just hang on to it. That particular member of the Born on Third Base Club and Harold Ballard had one common strength. Their most authentic quality seemed to be, insecurity and resentment of expertise. Whether that's directed at, intellectuals and school teachers or directed at the media and hockey players, it works on a portion of the public. In his day, Ballard kind of directed it at anyone who knew hockey because they could tell that he really didn't. He was a promoter and a businessman. The Leafs played in an arena that was called the Carlton Street Cash Box, but they had the smallest hockey operations staff in the entire NHL, which, today, they have the hugest revenues in the league in non-pandemic times, and they probably have one of the largest scouting and research and development staffs under President Brendan Shanahan. So, yeah, we've kind of gotten into the one bad man narrative, but it is the context of Rick Vaive's hockey life and times. And his story is compelling because he was playing for this flagship franchise during its toughest decade. Neil, you and I were both 10-year-old-ish Leaf fans then. And I suppose it was probably like being a 10-year-old Dallas Cowboys fan in 2020. You get born into supporting this legacy franchise that gets prime TV dates because it's a big market team with a plethora of championships it won in your parents' youth. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones is also a big-time promoter and businessman, and there's evidence that the NFL's Emperor Palpatine has a heart for the working folks. That was a Ballard trait too. But Jones also wants the spotlight on him to the extent that you wonder if he even really wants his team to win big. And that was the reality of the Leafs in Rick Vaive's era. Ballard's energy eventually did return to the earth with his death in 1990. But as you said, the heavy fog only really began to lift from the franchise a couple of years later, probably when they traded for Doug Gilmour on January 2nd, 1992, exactly 10 years to the day after Darryl Sittler left the team after all the, accumulations of aggression against him from Ballard and, general managers like Punch Imlach.
And the passion returned on VHS.
Ooh, chill bumps there, Neil. Chill bumps. Now, you and I have a running thing about my relationship status with the Leafs. I guess due to the stubbornness I inherited from my Scandinavian ancestors, you'll say, Nate, you are a Leaf fan. You grew up playoff beard when you were in high school. And I'm kind of I'm a lapsed Leaf fan. I left the church, I view the NHL through the lens of Leaf Nation, but I have to hold space for the memes and the jokes and the trolling of my immediate family.
You had the same reaction we all had in 1993 when that during Game 6, and that's I always hold you to that too. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, it's a way. Well, it's, today it's kind of a way of protecting oneself from getting your heart broke. I guess that stems from the Ballard era. He haunts us still. To give one example, of the stresses Rick Vaive had. Something he mentions in the book. He writes about a time his wife Joyce was upset about how nasty Ballard was to CBC radio legend Barbara Frum during a phone interview. I recall reading it in one of Houston's books. He said stuff like, women shouldn't be on the radio. They're a joke. First off, really? 52% of the population shouldn't have a voice on the radio? And how pathetically naive do you have to be to think Barbara Frum was going to be, take that bait? She famously teased a member of the Manson family live on the air one time. Now, I was trying to find that clip on YouTube before realizing You Great Thundering Nit was on the radio. Just check the CBC site. But in trying to find it, what I found instead was this CBC TV story circa, Christmas time 1982, when Rick Vaive would have been the 23-year-old captain of the Maple Leafs. And the angle was all the anger in Toronto during this prolonged Leafs losing streak, or slump. I guess they were something like 1-14-1 in their last 16 games. And still made the playoffs that year because Norris Division. So the first bit of B-roll in the story is Vaive yelling. You could clearly read lips with this deadpan voiceover. Players are frustrated. And then the voiceover says, it's a credit to the legend that people were still coming to Maple Leaf Gardens. And, and Ballard is defiant throughout it, saying, people will show up in Toronto no matter what. I've got my monopoly that lets me serve you mediocrity. I wish, sorry, I'm going to do a soapbox jump here. You could take that clip into a Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment boardroom, once it's safe to have gatherings of more than 10 people, and use it to just show the unfairness of Southern Ontario just having the one NHL team. Descend from the hobby horse. They have what they have with Leaf Nation because people, out of their good nature and maternal optimism, they supported that Ballard brand hockey. And, restitution, I think, should mean getting another team because screw the broadcast territories and everything else the NHL has ever claimed without consulting with the fans.
You are a Leafs fan, aren't you, Nate?
Yeah, no. Now, this book does succeed at showing what it was like for Rick Vaive to be the captain and the 50-goal scorer in that environment. I'm, curious how long that stress stays with someone after their playing days. They've really told Vaive and Scott Morrison this story with some sensitivity. And I think it ends up becoming uplifting, and I think we're all looking for an uplifting story right now about, in this case, someone who earned the applause, but endured tough times throughout and thereafter.
Coming up, Rick Vaive. And we're back on SportsLit with Rick Vaive. Before we start, Rick, I've got to tell you a funny story. And I just thought of this last night when I was talking to my co-host about preparing questions for today to ask you. Both myself and Nate Sager, actually, we didn't know it at the time, but we were at the Cataraqui Town Centre in Kingston, Ontario, and we got our first NHL autographs from you and Greg Therrien in 1985. So we didn't even know each other at the time, but so we thank you for that.
No problem. It's always nice to give out autographs to the fans, because I know they appreciate it.
Well, I have to ask you, and I heard you signed 108 books for Indigo, but I imagine there was supposed to be some sort of a press tour that would accompany this, just like when Dougie Gilmore or Wendell Clark released their book. So, given that the pandemic's gone on for 10 months now, you must have known pretty quickly that you'd have to market this book probably remotely, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I signed about 300 book plates, so they'll be on books, and we're going to do some virtual things later on in December. So, it's not like going out to see your fans, but you know what? It's the next best thing, and they're doing everything they can.
So on that note, you retired from the NHL in 1992, and that was right around the time Cliff Fletcher had kind of reinvigorated alumni relations with the Leafs, and people like Darryl Sittler came back in the fold. So I was wondering, when you retired, how soon were you able to come back into the Maple Leafs alumni fold, or did you put that on hold while you pursued coaching and things like that?
Yeah, no, I went on and coached for 8 years, 5 in the East Coast League, 2 in the American League with Calgary's farm team in St. John, and then 1 year with the Ice Dogs in Mississauga. And then actually I started working at the Score, doing some analyzing of NHL games on ice surfing, I believe it was called. And then the next step was Leafs TV for a few years and part-time ambassador. And then after that, I kind of got more into playing the alumni games and doing appearances with some of the corporate partners, like flying down to Florida with some of their MLSE's corporate partners, or getting on a train and going to Montreal or Ottawa. So, and I love doing it. It's so much fun meeting people, and so that's kind of what I've been doing up until now, and except for this year, of course.
Well, yeah. When you started doing the, like you're talking about going down to Florida or going on the train to Montreal, did that kind of like complete a part of you? Because I mean, what I got out of this book was I didn't realize, you were, for example, when you retired, you were watching the 92, 93 run and kind of rooting for the guys. And I mean, given the way you left, did you feel complete, or it had come full circle when you were able to engage with the alumni again and connect with the people that saw you do what you did in the 80s and light it up for the Leafs?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's, you're getting to meet guys you played, or reconnecting with guys you played with. You're getting to meet guys you didn't play with. I mean, like a guy like Nick Antropov, for instance, I didn't know him. I never played with him, but we're playing in alumni games, and we've become pretty good buddies now. And actually, I always want him as my centerman now because he's the best player out there. So I just get open and say, Nick, get me the puck, and he does it.
Right.
Now, Rick, why was this a good point in your life to sort of sit down with Scott Morrison and tell your life story?
Well, I think it was time. I mean, I've been asked a million, well, maybe not a million, but quite a few times about writing a book, and I just didn't feel it was the right time. And then this time around, I have a grandson now, and that's 15 months old, and my boys are 35 and 31. And I think I've heard so much, people talking about, people that are playing in the top pro leagues, basketball, baseball, hockey, you name it. And, I think everybody, or not everybody, but a vast majority of them look at guys that like 13 years in the NHL, oh, his life must have been perfect, and he must be a millionaire now, which is one hell of a far cry from the truth, I can tell you that. But you know what, I thought it was time, to let everybody know, and I know there's other guys that have written books about their hardships, but you know what, life isn't perfect, and I don't think it is for anybody. There's hurdles and there's things to get through, and if you're good enough to get through them, or you persevere, you're going to have success. And if you don't, well, you fall by the wayside, unfortunately, because everybody goes through times in their lives when they have to dig deep and get over something.
Yeah, and of course the title is, of course, Catch-22. What are some examples of the Catch-22s you faced as a hockey player and as an individual? Well,
I didn't count them, but I think throughout the book, there's probably about 30 or 40 situations, and it's just one of those things. We talked about the title, and I mentioned that, and then, of course, I had to check to see if there's any infringement problems with the movie that came out many, many years ago, and of the same name, and there wasn't. But I think throughout the book, there's, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but other than maybe when Harold said, "You're captain," he didn't ask me, and it was a situation, Catch-22 situation, that I didn't think I was ready to be the captain. Thought I needed a year or two more in the league. But at the same time, I didn't want to leave Toronto, and I figured if I said no, that he was going to trade me.
Yeah, and I sort of want to quickly jump in there. When I'm looking back at that in retrospect, your teammate Borje Salming he'd been with the team 10 years and was one of the most and was respected by everyone. He's in the Hall of Fame, and like what were the circumstances at the time that why wasn't he given have given the C and had it put on his jersey?
Well, you know what? That I actually don't really know. I do know that Harold loved Boria, and it was one of those situations that he wasn't going to trade him regardless. And I'm pretty sure that he must have been asked several times, and he probably said no. He didn't want probably the burden of having that on his sweater. But then I know that when Matt Sundin was asked to be captain, he called Boria right away, and Boria told him, no, don't turn it down. He said it'll be the best thing for you, and it's an honor to be the captain of the Maple Leafs, so take it. So I'm assuming that at the time he didn't want to deal with it, and I don't know that for sure. Like I said, I can't put words in his mouth, but I'm just guessing.
It's interesting because Harold Ballard is a big part of this book, and he remains a polarizing figure. And it's interesting. I just thought of it. I was going to ask this later, but because you mentioned Boria and he liked Boria, I mean, if you read Wendell Clark's Bleeding Blue, he liked Wendell. So I just wanted to know. I mean, he was polarizing because there were some guys that liked him and he liked them. But why were there certain people you think he just didn't like? And do you think that was generally tied to something to do with finances?
Yeah, well, when I say he didn't like, I don't think he didn't like anybody. I mean, I don't think he felt that way about any of the players, but I think it all came down to whatever a guy wanted money-wise. And,
right.
If Harold thought it was okay for him to pay the guy that much money, then, he would do it. But, I don't think he hated any of the players or disliked any of the players. I think there was players that, he liked maybe a little bit more, like Boria, who, fought through the 70s, the Broad Street Bullies and all that, and came out of it and, showed that he was a lot tougher than people thought he was just because he was from Sweden. And then, of course, you got Wendell, who played a game the way all the guys played it back then, and he was tough as nails, and he could score goals. And I don't know. I couldn't tell you if he liked me or disliked me or not. I had no idea because we never really talked a whole lot. He was around a lot, but there wasn't any moment where we sat down and actually had a conversation.
Right. Just going back to Wendell, he released a book in 2016, and I interviewed him with for Yahoo at that time. I was writing for Yahoo, and he talked about his injury-plagued years from 87 to 90, and he said, quote, "Had I not met a fellow like Chris Broadhurst who dedicated his time and then became head trainer with the Leafs and getting that kind of medical treatment," he means good medical treatment, "my body wouldn't have been able to play eventually." So I wanted to know, where in the chronology does Chris Broadhurst come in? Did he come in after you left, after you were traded to Chicago? Because I imagine he would have probably been able to help you too.
Yeah, I think he came in actually it was definitely after I was gone. I mean, there was no such thing when I was there as getting the proper diagnosis or treatment. And that's just the way it was. I mean, like I said, back in the late 70s and early 80s, 21 teams, there was probably 5 out of 21 that had a legitimate trainer that could look after those types of things and good. Not that our doctors weren't good. I mean,
right.
It's just that it's one thing to know and be a doctor, but it's another thing to know what's going on with hockey players and what's going on inside, what hurts, and that sort of thing. And of course, we didn't have the MRI machines and all that or access to them back then. So some things went undiagnosed, and unfortunately, it happened to a lot of guys.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting at. I mean, yeah, you kind of unfortunately. When you were playing, it was just before that time when specialization probably came in and might have been able to extend your career, right? Because I think if I remember reading the book, You found out you had an injury later, right? When you went to another team, was it a separated shoulder?
Yeah, I had quite a few of them on both shoulders, but in Buffalo, I got hit and went in with my shoulder, turned my head at the last second from behind into the boards, and the doctor said it was an old injury. And I said, well, like, what do you mean it's an old injury? I can't move my arm. You know, he's adamant that, no, see, this is just stuff from an old injury. And, yeah, I did separate my shoulder, but it wasn't that bad. And like I say, you can't move your arm. And I ended up playing a week later, and I still couldn't hardly move my arm. But, you know, they were convinced that there was nothing wrong with me. And so I had to play, and I didn't play very well because of that for the rest of the season. And that affected how the next season started.
I'm going to ask you to read a section now of the book, and it deals with the first catch-22 in your career. So if you have the book, I'll let you take a second to find it, and yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I got it right here. A lot of people thought naming me was a knee-jerk reaction by Harold, Jerry, and Nicolak. Harold just approached me one day in the outer area of the dressing room and said, "You're our captain." He didn't ask me, he just told me. The coach announced it in an interview that night, but that was all the notice my promotion received. So just like that, I was the 12th captain in the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs, joining the likes of Daryl Sittler, Dave Keon, George Armstrong, Ted Kennedy, and Sil Apps. I remember thinking, this is fabulous. It was a huge honor. There's no question about it. And I recognized it at the time. But I was just 22 years old and not sure I was ready to take on the role. I didn't know how the other guys were going to react. If I could wait a couple of years, I'd be more ready, I thought. But if I turned him down, he'll probably trade me. That was the last thing I wanted. So I just said, "Thank you, Mr. Ballard. I'm honored, and I'll do the best job that I possibly can." I think Harold asked Boria a couple of times to be captain, probably when Daryl gave up the C, but Boria always said no. He didn't want to be the captain. Boria also knew he could say no because Harold loved him. He wasn't going to get mad and trade him. He would have been the logical choice. I think over time, Boria probably regretted it, but he was also happy to be an assistant captain and not have to talk to the press every day, which is probably one of the biggest reasons he didn't want it. I know that years later, when Matt Sundin was asked to be captain, he spoke with Boria, who told him to accept it, that it was something he ultimately regretted not taking because it was the Toronto Maple Leafs, not the Arizona Coyotes or the Florida Panthers. Not to diss those teams and their captains, but this was the Leafs, and it's a hell of an honor. This was the first catch-22 of my career. The fact that I was 22 years old at the time is just a coincidence. I know I'm really not ready to be captain, but if I say no, I'll probably get traded and never get a chance to wear the C or even an A in one of the most historic franchises in the NHL, which I really wanted to happen someday. So I'm the captain of the Leafs, ready or not.
There you go. Thank you for reading that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rick. And I have to imagine, like, now, if, a young player gets put in that situation, there's, all sorts of people he could talk to. I have to imagine you didn't really have anyone who could give you sort of a rundown or, a how-to on how to have that responsibility at such an early stage of your career.
No, it was difficult. I mean, Boria helped a lot. Well, I sat right beside Boria, right to his left, and he did help me out quite a bit. He always had my back if I stood up and said anything, and anybody would say anything about it. He would jump in and help, and so that kind of eased what I was going through. But I became a much better captain a couple of years later, I think, and especially when we got younger and I was one of the older guys, and you gain that respect from the young guys, and they tend to listen to you a little bit more.
I really thought it was, I'm not sure if it was you or Scott Morrison maybe added the part where you talked about, and I talked about this in my intro, kind of like when you came in in 1980. I mean, the idea of the captaincy with the Leafs, there's really that was just maybe 6 weeks after Darryl had taken the scalpel to his C. And, it was almost like the opposite of the Montreal Canadiens, where they have the sign on the wall that says, to you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. It seemed like that was right. You arrived right when the Leafs were kind of having that really tough time, and there seemed to be a separation. So I can imagine, being the leader on that team at that time, it must have felt strange. I mean, did you feel like the attachment to the history was fading in any way? Or, I mean, at that point, are you just a 22-year-old kid just trying to play hockey?
Well, I think probably more the latter. I mean, it was a circus around there with Harold and the stuff that went on. And, the fact that he wouldn't pay, probably all of us were underpaid compared to what players on other teams were making for what they did, and if they were equivalent to what we did. Also, he wouldn't pay for a good general manager that could, make that deal at the deadline that we needed to get over the hump, or, keep those young 18-year-olds in junior for a couple of years and let them mature and get bigger and stronger. No, put them in and let them fail, and that's exactly what happened. So, it was tough, but. And all the stuff that went on with Darryl and Mike Palmateer and Punch Imlach, and but I always believed that he's a general manager. He's asking them not to go in that because someone in the shootout thing they had on Hockey Night in Canada, because the year before someone got hurt and missed a whole month of the season. Well, I don't know. I was always taught and brought up that if he's your boss or your general manager, whatever he is, you do what you're told. And, so I don't know. I thought it was maybe a little wrong to go ahead and just do it and piss Punch off, but they did. And then, that everything that happened after that is all history and well documented, that, all Darryl's buddies were traded, and that was Punch's way of getting back at it.
And for yourself, like later on, I know you talk in the book, you say you realize now that you sort of had, troubles with anxiety. I wonder, like, at what point after playing for the Leafs did you sort of realize that was going on inside you while you were playing for the team?
Well, I kind of knew all along, but there was one thing that kind of took care of it for me, unfortunately, and that was alcohol. And then when I started coaching after my first year coaching, I decided that I wasn't going to drink anymore, and I quit. And then all of a sudden, I started having these problems where I couldn't swallow, and the anxiousness and all that. And then I was diagnosed with it when I went and saw the team doctor. So I went through all those years with the same thing, but it was the alcohol that I turned to, and unfortunately, that wasn't the best thing for me.
I just want to ask you about that, and in the sense of, I think it's 9 years next week, where you haven't touched a drop, and I want to ask you, do you think the public has come along in understanding that? Like, I mean, maybe 20 years ago, if you saw someone, a player or whatever, had a DUI, they may look at it in a different way. Do you think we've come a long way in terms of, not just the people that may have the issue, but people understanding that other people may have issues? You know what I mean? Like, do you think people are more understanding?
I'm not so sure, to be quite honest with you. I think a lot of people, I don't know what the split would be or the percentage, but I still think there's a lot of people out there that, think that, our lives are different than theirs because we were professional athletes. And, I think now, as far as like alcoholism and stuff, I think people are much more informed on that now. Yes. And, I think, and I truly believe it's genetic, and I think it's almost been proven pretty much that it is. So, yeah, I think in that area, I think people are a lot more educated. But the other part, I'm not so sure what what the percentage would be. But I think there's a vast majority of people that think that, we never have any problems because we were athletes in the top leagues in North America.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen some of the other. It's been a week now, I think, since this book has been out, exactly a week. So I've seen some of the interviews you've had, and one of the things you're adamant about is making sure that if you wrote a book, it wasn't going to be any BS, right? You wanted to kind of explain your story with everything involved, and that comes across for sure. And I wanted to ask you, I imagine your friendship with Scott Morrison probably made that a lot easier to do, right? Because in the process of writing, he's probably, I imagine, recording with you or sitting somewhere with you and recording what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, to make a long story short, how did making a tell-all with everything that's in this book, how was that easier because of Scott Morrison's friendship with you?
Well, much easier. I mean, that was two of the things people, when they asked me about writing a book, I said no. I said it's not the right time, and there's only one guy I'm going to write a book with, and that's Scotty. And Scotty and I had a great relationship from the time he was covering us in Toronto, and I always respected Scotty for the way he did his interviews, and he was honest, and he didn't put anything in there that shouldn't have been in there. And I've been to his golf tournament for many years, and we've become pretty good friends. So I felt very comfortable with Scotty. It didn't keep me from talking about things that were difficult at all. It was because Scotty understood. He's been through some hardships himself, and
right.
He realizes that nothing's perfect, and so he was a perfect guy to write it with because he understood everything.
And the two of you go way back, I think, even to well before you were even in
let's
pro
not
hockey.
make it sound like we were in the dinosaur era now. Come on.
Well, no, he says the two we met before Rick was on the Leafs.
Yeah, I know. You just made it sound like it was like the last century or something.
Point taken.
2 centuries ago. But yeah, it goes back to the 80s and when Scotty covered us, and and we shared some old funny stories both back then, and they used to fly commercial, obviously the writers and so on, because Harold wouldn't let anybody on the plane, the charters. And well, we just shared a lot of funny stories about Rick Fraser and stuff like that, and just some crazy stuff that happened with those guys as well as us. And he told me a funny story one time. He said Rick always carried the bottle in his bag, and so he would always just order a ginger ale or something. And one of the flight attendants came by, and because he didn't like to fly, he was afraid of flying like I am. And she said, I better not see a different color in that glass next time I come by here. And anyway, then, Scotty was talking to Rick and said, like, well, why, like, when your time's up, your time's up. He says, yeah, but what if it's not my time, but it's his time? And he points to a guy sitting across the aisle from him.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty funny. And I know they had a lot of fun when they were on the road covering us, and but they weren't allowed on the charters, and I think as of today they're still not on the charters, not even the radio guys, Jim Ralph and Joe Bowen. They have to travel on commercial flights.
You also talk about, write about in the book, maybe if you were on the planes they're on now, things might have been a little bit easier. I'm imagining from a stress point of view and from maybe a rehabilitation point of view. I'm sure it's a lot easier if you're banged up, to be in a first class seat that in a plane that's not rattling around the sky.
Oh, absolutely. I think it would have made travel a little bit easier. And we went on one of their planes to Boston with a bunch of MLSE's corporate partners, and to watch a Leaf game in Boston. And I walked on, I couldn't believe it. I went, like, who owns this, a sheik or, something? All these rows of beautiful first-class seats, and in the middle, a big empty space where all the food was laid out and everything. And apparently they have the same flight attendants every flight, not the same pilots, but the same crew. And they know exactly what everybody wants to drink and everything else, and it's in their seat. It's waiting there when you get on the plane. So I think, that would have made me a heck of a lot more comfortable than one of those old Convair 540s or 640s. It was those were, you got in bad weather in those, and you could get bounced around pretty darn good.
Yeah, there's an interesting story, and I don't mean to make light of it, where you're talking about, like, you were, getting bounced around, or just reacting I guess reacting to the point where the rest of the team has calmed down because they seeing your reaction to a rocky flight. It's
they were pretty bad, and the fact that I was probably the worst guy on the plane, that made everybody else feel a little bit better.
So I read that, or I listened to an interview where you talked about the infamous, and I know you probably get asked about this all the time, the infamous Titan stick, and how it was in the Hall of Fame, and then you got it back. And I want to know how hard is it to get something back that's yours from the Hall of Fame, and what does that process involve?
Well, it's very difficult. I'll tell you that right now. And the gentleman that used to be the curator for the Hall of Fame, Lefty Reed, back in my day anyway, he would just, like, after I scored 50 goals, he just came in the dressing room and said, "We'd like to put your stick in the Hall of Fame." And you're a 22-year-old kid, and you're going, "Oh, gee, wow, like, my stick's going to be in the Hall of Fame." And then the next year, and then the next year. So all three of them. And, I've been trying for years to get the original back, the first one. And had to jump through hoops and barrels, and then I finally had to sign something that's saying that I wouldn't ask for the other two. I said, "That's okay. You can keep the other two, because I just want the one from the first year."
Yeah, and there's a quote too. Just building off of that, you said, "Hey, listen, to win a Stanley Cup, I wouldn't have traded my first 50-goal season. You could have the other two, because the Stanley Cup is the ultimate." I didn't realize how connected you were to rooting for the team after you retired. I mean, and watching the 92 and 93 run. I'd just like you to take me back to that time of just after retiring, and then having to see the Leafs that you bled for and played so well for, all of a sudden having that success you probably wanted all along.
Well, it was great, and it was difficult. I know that sounds funny, but there was a bunch of guys on that team that I played with. Not a bunch, but probably a handful. And then there was a bunch of other guys I kind of knew a little bit from playing against them and so on, and being at different things together. And it was great. It was great for the city. It was great for the team, the organization. But at the same time, I got traded in '87, and I was only 28 years old, or 26 years old, I guess, or 27. And I might have been there playing at that point. If I hadn't got traded to Chicago, I might have been still there playing, and maybe could have been the difference in maybe going to the winning it all,
right,
or going to the finals. And so it was kind of good, because I enjoyed watching them and seeing the guys that I played with have success, but at the same time thinking, gosh, if I just hadn't have been traded in '87, I could be there right now.
Right.
I think you maybe more than any other Toronto athlete might know how DeMar DeRozan felt when the Toronto Raptors won the NBA championship. And just put us in sort of in your skates. Now I think '86 and '87 the Leafs had a little bit of playoff run where they had got were one win from the conference final. What was the atmosphere like? How did the Gardens in those days kind of create its own energy?
Well, it was pretty crazy, actually, because in those days, you have to, if you're a season ticket holder, you have to purchase your playoff tickets by a certain date. And, things weren't going real good for us in some of those years during the regular season. And I remember that year, a lot of the season ticket holders didn't buy their playoff tickets, so they were sold to the public. So everybody in Toronto that were diehard Leaf fans that couldn't get tickets for regular season games, they came in and bought up all the playoff tickets. So it was actually crazy in there during that run. And I mean, like I think we swept Chicago in the first round, and brooms were being thrown on the ice and stuff like that. I mean, it was pretty crazy because those are the people that weren't season ticket holders. They came in and bought them because the season ticket holders didn't think we'd go past the first round anyway. And so it was kind of a different crowd.
And a young Nate Sager who just asked you that question, was taken with his father to that game because he wasn't a season ticket holder. And
yeah, my first NHL game. Yeah, I've got open the game summary in a browser tab. Yeah, April 12th, 1986, and there you are scoring the second goal in a 7-2 Leafs win.
And just to talk about, I mean, leads to something bigger too, because I remember being envious. First of all, we're both from Kingston, and you couldn't get Leaf tickets unless you knew a banker or your dad was a lawyer. So we were always envious and hearing about this mystical game, this sweep of Chicago, where the fans were actually the real fans. And I wonder sometimes if we'd benefit. I don't know if we can ever go back and put the genie in a bottle, but you go to a Maple Leafs game now. I've been on press row. We've all been there. And it goes across the league. Things are pretty quiet. I wonder sometimes if they just turned off the PA noise and just let the crowds create their own atmosphere, maybe had a section or two where the ticket prices were a little lower, how much home ice advantage may be created. I don't know. I think of that sometimes.
Yeah, that's hard to say, really. I mean, I guess it depends on where you are. I mean, I think if you're in any of the Canadian cities, I'm pretty darn sure that the crowd will. But if you're winning anyway, that's for sure. If you're losing, it might be a little different. But yeah, I think the crowd would really get into it. I mean, down at Scotiabank Arena, I've been there. I mean, a lot of games, and they've got a pretty exciting team, and they haven't in the playoffs, unfortunately, in the last few years. But during the regular season, I've been there where the crowds have been just crazy. And, and I think it's a generational thing, too, is that, I see a lot more younger people in the rink today than, say, back in the 80s. And that's probably because the parents are giving the tickets to their kids or, grandchildren or whatever the case might be. But the crowds are much younger, and it's kind of nice to see that the younger generation are getting involved with the organization in that capacity.
I want to ask you, this isn't in the book, and I don't mean to ask you the typical hockey question, but I mean, I will because I just thought of it. In terms of analytics, I mean, you played in an era where that wasn't considered, and some people think now it's being considered maybe too much. I mean, I wanted to know where you stand on analytics in evaluating and bringing in talent to any team.
Well, I think there's a certain part of some analytics that might be useful, but and they're more useful, obviously, in a sport like baseball than they would be in hockey. I mean, it's such a fast game, and I don't know. I just don't see analytics playing a big role in hockey. I think you can't judge a person's character and what they're going to do out there in order to win on analytics, because it just doesn't exist. So there's a lot of intangibles that go into finding a guy that's going to, help win you a Stanley Cup. And that's not in analytics. And, there's like, he goes this fast from here to there. He has a puck X amount of seconds in a game. And, I mean, it's crazy to look at all those and think that, that's the guy that we should draft because he's good at all those things that are in our analytics, because you can't judge his character. And I think character is, yes, I mean, skill and speed are very important, especially in today's game. But character, to me, is more important than any of that. And, I mean, yeah, you need skill and speed, but you got to have the character to win.
Is it a case where maybe it can support what you sort of already know from the eye test and I guess the gut test and know what you know to be true or what you think to be true?
Yeah, I think it could help a little bit. Yes, I there's certain things. I mean, if you're a goalie and your goals against is or your save percentage is .940 well, yeah, okay. We looked at him. He looks like he's got good character. He's a great goalie. He looks good, and he's got a .940 as opposed to an .870 save percentage. So he's good. So there are certain parts of analytics that would kind of clarify things if you knew the person's character. But in order to do that, you got to talk to the person. You got to talk to people that he played for. And I mean, that's what goes into scouting nowadays is, I mean, these guys are digging. They're going way down the tunnel to find out everything they can about a person before they draft them. And they talk to their former coaches and their relatives and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's crazy now how far down the tunnel they dig to find out about an individual before he's drafted.
And I wanted to ask quickly, too, from your perspective as a Leafs alumnus, what has Brendan Shanahan done as team president in terms of the way he just sort of understands what the Leafs mean to the city and the province and I guess really the whole country?
Well, I mean, I think he's done a ton. I mean, he really has. I mean, first of all, he got the team competitive again, brought in a coach that, was probably good at getting them to a certain level and teaching them what it takes to win. And then obviously he had to make a coaching change. But he's done a lot for the history of the franchise and our alumni. I mean, like we've got a nice suite on the 200 level right behind the visitors net that used to be 2, and he tore the wall down and made it into 1 so that our alumni could have a real good place to go and watch the games. And, there used to be a Leaf golf tournament at the start of the year, and there might have been 4 or 5 of us from the alumni there. Now he changed the name, made it the Leafs and Legends, and there's like 40 or 50 alumni, all the current players. And then there's the big blue and white gala at the Royal York. I mean, there's so many things that Brendan has done for the organization and for the alumni.
Yeah, and I would encourage, this is for our listeners, people to check out his appearance. He was on the SmartList podcast with Will Arnett of Arrested Development fame. Now, Rick, I'm also I spend a lot of time in my own head, and I sometimes wonder about, alternative histories, what might have been. I found it interesting, your first employer in the pro hockey was, John Bassett with the Baby Bulls in Birmingham in the WHA, and then you also played in Hamilton with the Hamilton Canucks in the AHL as, I think, a playing assistant coach. I'm just kind of wondering, what should people know about John Bassett and how he kind of tried to push for a second major pro hockey team in Southern Ontario?
Well, John was rich. We all know that. And John was kind of like I don't know, man. He was just yachting guy, and always was nice and tanned and groomed, and it was like Hugh Hefner walking into the room when he came into the room, and you're looking, you're going, holy cow, who is this guy? Is he a movie star or something? And but he was a real nice man, and he did a good thing for all of us Baby Bulls that played in Birmingham that year, and I think he kind of knew that the merger was going to take place and we weren't going to be part of it. So he signed all of us about halfway through the season to new contracts, and 4-year deals, and for a lot more money than what we made in our first contracts in the NHL, because part of the deal in the merger was that the NHL would have to honor all existing WHA contracts. And of course it didn't. And we went to court, and each of us received a little bit of I don't know what you call it, a payout, I guess, or something, which wasn't close to what their contracts were. But anyway, it was it was money that was well deserved, and money that helped us at the start of our careers.
Yeah, and I guess in the alternate history part, I mean, that Birmingham team had played in Toronto, and I just thought that because I live in Hamilton and not far from the arena where you played. It just always makes me wonder, like, what if, John could have found a way to have kept that franchise in Southern Ontario? Do they get in the NHL in the merger in 1979? But I guess maybe that's a bit of a fairy tale for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, somebody tried in Markham recently, and I don't see it happening. Not anywhere near the GTA. It's not going to happen. The Maple Leafs are Toronto, the GTA, most of Ontario, with the exception of the Ottawa area, I guess. But I mean, it's just I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think you'll ever see another team in Ontario, another professional team in Ontario. And I say that because I think the Maple Leafs just are not going to let that happen, MLSE and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and there's too much at stake, and I'm not sure another team could survive in this area, because everybody says, it's funny, I've heard it so many times that it's a hockey market. And well, guess what? Brampton Battalion had to move because they couldn't draw any fans. The Ice Dogs, they're not the Ice Dogs anymore, they're what the heck are they?
The Steelheads. Steelheads, I think. And they don't draw, and probably will end up moving at some point. Now Hamilton's far enough away that I think they do okay. Their junior team, but other than that, like even the Marlies, they give a lot of tickets away because they want people in the seats. And no, it's a Leaf town. It's not a hockey town.
Well said. Go ahead, Nate.
No, you got it.
Okay, well, I won't keep you too much longer because I know you've given us a lot of time. So I have just a couple quick questions for you. The first one, it kind of like follows Nate's what if, and I just wonder in terms of, you came from an era where guys weren't getting big time money. At least maybe Gretzky was, but a lot of the guys weren't. And you were a prolific scorer. I just sometimes wonder, do you think if you had scored 50 for another team, let's say the North Stars, do you think your current marketability would have, what does it mean for you now to what you can, command when you're out, and the demand people have to want to see you get your autograph? What does it mean to have done that and have those 50 goal seasons with the Leafs as opposed to someone else, maybe on the autograph market?
Well, it means a lot because, like I say, it's a Leaf town, and it's the whole GTA. And when I do a lot of appearances and stuff like that, and the people come out in droves. To get autographs from former Leafs, current Leafs, you name it. And for me, it's like, when you walk out of Maple Leaf Gardens and there's like literally probably 100 people standing there waiting for an autograph, and you're standing in the middle of the winter, freezing, and it's for 45 minutes or so signing autographs. But that, you take that with your job. That's like, okay, they're waiting to get an autograph, and I'm going to oblige because, these people, they're diehard fans, and they care about it. And most of them that are out there are probably people that have season tickets, so they're also paying your paycheck. So, but no, it's kind of nice because I don't think. Minnesota is a pretty big hockey market, anywhere else in Canada. But I think if you go to most of the other places, you wouldn't be getting that same type of thing after you're retired.
And I'll close on this. A lot of the stories so far on this book, a lot of the interviews have dealt with, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have Rick Vaive's 22 up in the rafters? So I'll change that around and just ask you. Let's say it does go up. What will you be thinking about when you see it go up, if it ever does?
What would I? Wow. Well, first of all, I'd be thinking of, what an honor it is, obviously, to be up there with, all those great players that are up there now. And I guess I'd be thinking about family, my immediate family, my family I grew up with, and how my mom and dad went without, so we could always have hockey equipment or baseball equipment, whatever we needed to play sports. So I think all those things would be going through my mind, and if it happens, and it certainly would be a wonderful evening for my family, that's for sure.
And you think, just one thing I forgot to ask, I mean, because I work with Steve Ludzik at The Score, and I wanted to, you acknowledge him at the end of the book. I just wanted to know how, was it in Buffalo that you guys became friends, or in Rochester, and how did you guys become so tight over the years, and how's Ludsy doing now?
No, actually, it was in Chicago. We played together in Chicago for a year and a half, and then he was in Rochester when I was in Buffalo. And we kept in touch somewhat, like not, on a regular weekly basis or anything. And then, I heard he had Parkinson's, and I came down to visit him, and he started wanting to do golf tournaments and a roast and everything to open a center at Hotel du Shaver for Parkinson's rehab. And so I started helping out, and everything was done really, really well. Golf tournaments went off every year, the roast, and so then, I was down here so much that I decided to move down here.
To Niagara.
To Niagara, yeah.
Wow.
And get out of Oakville and make a little money in the process by selling a house that I bought in 2000 for a lot more than what I paid for it, and buying one for cheaper than what I paid for the Oakville one originally in 2000. So it all worked out pretty darn good.
Okay.
And right now, Ludsy's doing pretty good. He's hanging in there, and I drive up. He's not that far. He lives probably about 1.5 miles from me, and so I drop in once in a while, and he drops in here once in a while when he's driving around, and it's great because we love to sit around and chat about the old times and get caught up on what's going on now. I mean, I think he's got 4 grandchildren now, and but he's hanging in there, and hopefully something will happen soon, and he'll get a donor of a part of the liver that he needs, and he'll be around to enjoy his grandchildren for many years.
Well said. Well, again, Rick Vaive, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day. I know you're a big golfer, so I hope we didn't interrupt your golf game today, or upcoming. And
not in this weather.
Well, you just need a little patch of green down the fairway.
We got indoor golf, so there's a real nice place here in Niagara.
Oh, nice.
My buddies and I, we usually try to go once or twice a week and play a little 18-hole match indoors, and it's a lot of fun. So we keep it up during the winter because I'm pretty darn sure there isn't going to be any alumni games this winter. So
who's the best?
So we'll
go ahead.
We'll be out there. We'll be in there hitting the ball off the screen. And in fact, one of my buddies texted me and said, "Do you want to play Friday?" And I can't because I've got some interviews to do Friday. I said, but hey, next week, except for Monday, I'm free every day right now.
Hey, who's the best Maple Leaf alumni golfer? Is it Mark Osborne? I've been hearing him tell me a lot about how great he is. Who's the best Maple Leaf alumni?
No, it's not Ozzy. It's Gary Lehman's probably the best alumni. I like to say I am, but I'm not. But hey, you know what? This year I started the year at a 9 handicap and brought it down to a 4. So things are looking good. Even though I'm getting older, I go to a buddy of mine in Kitchener, a guy from Scotland who has a teaching and fitting center, and I go there once a month roughly, and he's got a fabulous place with cameras everywhere so you can see what you're doing, and it's really helped my game. It's probably given me about 15, 20 extra yards, and So it's been great.
Well, you know what? This has been great. Thank you so much for joining us today, and good luck with the rest of the interviews, and I hope the book is received well by everyone else like it was by us.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.